Dear Lord, bless every heart listening today. May these words bring clarity to our relationships, healing to our wounds, and courage to our decisions. Amen. Welcome to Mr. Favor Tales, where stories mend broken hearts and rekindle forgotten promises. Here, every tale carries a lesson, and every fall is a chance to rise again. If you're someone who believes love is worth fighting for, this one's for you. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, so more souls can find hope through storytelling. Their love survived poverty, but it couldn't survive his prosperity. The snow outside hadn't stopped falling for hours, coating the narrow streets of West Side Cleveland in a quiet, suffocating white, but inside a cramped apartment above a laundromat, the hum of washing machines below was rivaled by something softer, something warmer. It was laughter. Mark's, as he watched Sarah balancing a pan of instant mac and cheese in one hand and their daughter in the other. The child was no more than 3 months old, gurgling on a foldable high chair as steam rose in the cold air from their dollar store stove. The room was barely big enough to hold a table, a bed, and their dreams, but it held them tightly. Mark turned back to his soldering iron, carefully aligning a small circuit board. His hands were rough from years of labor, but his touch on technology was almost delicate. Beside him, his desk, a wooden crate balanced on cinder blocks, was littered with sketches, prototypes, and one small photo of him and Sarah, taken outside the community college where they first met. That day remained fresh in his mind. It was the fall of 2001, and Cleveland was still clawing its way out of industrial decline. Rusted factories stood like fossils against the skyline. The city was full of people who had learned to live on less, including him. Mark had attended a free coding workshop at the community tech center. He didn't expect much. He already knew how to take apart and rebuild a desktop from spare parts, having taught himself on second-hand machines. He came more to find potential collaborators than to learn, and that's when he met her, Sarah. She was standing at the back of the classroom, glasses slightly tilted, explaining to another student why the power supply wasn't working. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was confident. Her braid swung over her shoulder as she crouched to test the unit. Mark was struck by her, not just her appearance, but her calm assurance. They both reached for the same broken PC when the instructor asked for volunteers to try fixing it. Their hands bumped, and Mark laughed awkwardly. "Ladies first," he said. She gave him a smile. "How about teamwork instead?" That night, they stayed after the workshop ended, finishing the repair together and talking about their dreams. He told her about his obsession with building smarter auto components, even while working days as a mechanic and nights at a part-time IT job. She shared her plan to transfer from community college to pursue a finance degree while helping her family get through tough times. They were both children of struggle, and somehow, that struggle made their bond stronger. Mark's father had passed when he was just 13, leaving behind medical bills and an aging Pontiac. His mother worked 2 shifts at the diner. His little sister depended on him. Every day, Mark learned to be both brother and father figure. Sarah's dad, an accountant who lost his job in the banking crash, spent years trying to re-establish himself. Her mother, battling early symptoms of arthritis, worked at the school cafeteria, while Sarah took on summer jobs and still managed straight A's. Their backgrounds weren't glamorous, but they were real. They gave both Mark and Sarah an anchor. In a world that often seemed unfair, they found something priceless: each other's faith. Within 6 months, they were dating. Within a year, they were living together above the laundromat. That tiny apartment, cold in winter, overheated in summer, became the laboratory of their love. Sarah used her spare time to study finance and help Mark build spreadsheets for a small business plan. Mark, when he wasn't fixing cars, was building custom sensors in the back room. They'd stay up until 2 a.m. many nights, dreaming aloud while eating canned beans and taping blueprints to the wall. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, she panicked. Not because she doubted Mark, but because the future was unclear. Would they be enough? Could they build something stable out of hope? Mark hugged her tightly that night and whispered, "We're already enough. Our love just needs a plan." That plan became M&S Technologies, a name they jotted down on a napkin, while sitting in a broken-down Chevy, parked outside a closed diner. They weren't tech moguls or engineers with capital, but they had something a lot of people didn't: hunger and harmony. They rented a small office near the flats, an industrial district with more boarded-up windows than thriving businesses. But the rent was cheap, and they needed only space for a desk, a soldering table, and a dream. Sarah handled the paperwork, incorporated the company, and used her accounting know-how to secure a tiny line of credit. They bought second-hand machinery and used every dollar wisely, down to penny pinching on printer ink. Mark repaired electronics for local shops on the side to keep money coming in. Their daughter was born in a city hospital where nurses knew them by name. She came into the world at 2:14 a.m., her cries louder than the winter wind against the paneled windows. They named her Eva, a name that meant life. And in many ways, that's what Eva became for them, a reason to keep building, a reason to believe. By the time Eva turned 1, M&S had landed its first real contract, a small but steady supply deal with a local manufacturing plant. Sarah had negotiated every detail, marking a new phase in their journey. It wasn't glamorous, but it was proof. They were moving forward. Mark's components, custom modified for older machines, were gaining attention in niche circles. People started to talk about the young couple from Cleveland doing innovative things with very little. They moved into a slightly bigger storefront. Mark surprised Sarah one evening with a neon sign that read, M&S Technologies, precision in every part. She stared at it, her eyes misty. Looks professional, she said. You are professional, Mark replied. I just make the sparks. On the night of their housewarming party, held in the backyard of their modest new home, Mark handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a thin silver ring, not flashy, but sincere. We earned this, he whispered. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. Yes, she said. We did. They weren't just a couple in love. They were a team. A unit. Sarah scheduled trade expos, handled vendor contracts, made hiring decisions. Mark handled engineering, customer service, and training apprentices. When her nephew came to stay for a few months, while his parents tried to get on their feet, Sarah didn't hesitate. She made room in their home and heart. Mark installed a second bunk in Eva's room. Family to them was fluid, a network of support, no matter how fragile. Evenings were spent sorting invoices and feeding toddlers. Sundays were for long drives to discount suppliers, or a rare visit to the zoo. They made time, even when time was short. And through it all, their love grew deeper. They didn't need luxury. They needed each other. And in those early years, that was more than enough. Neither of them saw the shift coming. It didn't happen in a single moment. It crept in slowly, like rust on a well-used tool. It began with a new client, a mid-sized auto manufacturer in Detroit. Impressed by Mark's modifications, they placed a sizable order. Revenue spiked. More clients followed. Sarah had to hire additional staff to handle logistics. Mark began getting invited to conferences and trade shows. His name was mentioned in regional tech magazines. Suddenly, they weren't just small-time anymore. They had stepped into the world of high-stakes business. And in that new world, the weight on their relationship would only grow heavier. Cleveland was changing, and so were Mark and Sarah. The city that once loomed over their dreams with gray skies and crumbling infrastructure now looked different from the view of their new townhouse balcony. Their neighborhood was on the rise, an area near Lakewood where young professionals, artists, and small business owners were starting to settle in. Property values were climbing, so were expectations. Mark had traded in his old station wagon for a sleek company vehicle, a hybrid SUV with the M&S logo discreetly etched on the back window. Sarah upgraded her wardrobe from thrift shop chic to tailored business casual. Eva was now attending a well-rated elementary school across town, and every morning Sarah packed her lunch with handwritten notes. But inside their rising empire, a quiet tension was beginning to stir. The Detroit automaker wasn't a one-off. It became a door opener. Soon, a powerful Ohio-based conglomerate, Triarch Manufacturing, came knocking. They were building a new smart plant just outside Cincinnati and wanted a custom sensor system. Mark's designs, praised for their precision and modular build, were on their radar. This wasn't just another contract. This was the kind of deal that put your company in trade journals, that made investors take notice. It was 6 times bigger than any deal they'd ever handled. Executives in pressed suits came to tour their facility. Sarah, as usual, had every financial model ready. Mark had a working prototype installed and demonstrated on a real-time interface board. The deal closed. And it closed fast. Mark couldn't believe it. "We're on the map," he whispered the night they got the confirmation. Sarah smiled, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Yes, but now we have to deliver." And so began a season of expansion that would redefine everything they had built. Mark went into overdrive. He hired engineers, leased a full production space in the Euclid Industrial Park, and established new departments. No longer was he soldering by hand, he was overseeing operations, meeting with legal teams, approving materials lists, and flying to Chicago to meet with plant managers. He also began dressing differently. Tailored shirts, better shoes, a Rolex gifted by a vendor. Sarah noticed the change, but she didn't mind. Not at first. Mark deserved recognition. He had worked so hard. He wasn't just a mechanic or a self-taught techie anymore. He was a respected entrepreneur. Newspapers ran features on his journey. TEDx Cleveland invited him to speak. People quoted his philosophies on innovation, but success does something strange to the mind. It blurs the edges of humility. With the growth of the company, Sarah made the decision to step away from day-to-day accounting. Instead, they brought in a CFO recommended by one of their advisory board members, an older gentleman who had handled multiple mergers and acquisitions. His name was Carl Maddox. Carl was competent, well-connected, and made it clear that he respected Sarah's foundational role. "You've built something special here," he told her during his first week. But Carl's presence also changed the energy. Meetings became more rigid. Financial decisions were filtered through more bureaucracy. Sarah, though still a board member and co-founder, wasn't always in the room where big decisions were being made. Mark didn't mean to edge her out. At least not consciously, but he began to enjoy being the sole decision-maker. Weeknights, once spent on their porch sipping cocoa and planning together, were now overtaken by conference calls and event RSVPs. They were invited to tech galas, manufacturing awards, networking dinners. Sarah came along to most, always poised, always present, but she could feel Mark drifting, not toward another woman, not yet, but toward another version of himself. The old Mark would drive Eva to school before heading to the office. The new Mark left at dawn, already on calls before breakfast. He used to sketch designs at the kitchen table. Now he had an assistant schedule his brainstorming sessions. Still, Sarah believed in him. She believed in the mission. She held the home together, helped with school projects, and used her spare time to research strategic growth. But inside, something was shifting. A quiet grief was growing, grief for the simplicity they had lost. It happened over a contract Sarah never saw. Mark had signed an aggressive expansion deal with a foreign distributor looking to bring M&S parts into European markets. The deal sounded lucrative, but it involved committing a large portion of their existing manufacturing capacity and collateralizing company assets. When Sarah saw the fine print, she froze. "You signed this without showing me?" Mark, clearly exhausted from another red-eye flight, rubbed his temples. It was time-sensitive. Carl ran it through legal. "We needed to lock it down before Phoenix Components stepped in." "Phoenix Components is a different niche," she replied. "You should have come to me." Mark's tone sharpened. "I didn't have time for a debate." That stung. Sarah stood motionless. "This is our company, Mark," she whispered. "Remember?" He didn't answer right away, and that silence was louder than any shout. The weeks that followed weren't filled with shouting matches. No drama, just distance. Mark began traveling more. Atlanta, Charlotte, Denver, some of it necessary, some of it perhaps avoidable. When he came home, he'd bring Eva gifts, a toy robot from Chicago, a keychain that played sound effects. But Sarah saw that the child didn't light up like she used to. "He's always gone," Eva once said during breakfast, tracing circles in her cereal milk. Sarah watched her daughter carefully, heart aching. "He loves you, baby. He's just working hard for all of us." "Do you work hard too?" Eva asked innocently. "I do," Sarah said softly, "in a different way." And in that moment, she realized even her daughter sensed the imbalance. Mark's brilliance was undeniable. But with recognition came adoration, and with adoration came temptation. He never crossed a physical line. But the attention from younger female professionals, the admiration in the eyes of marketing managers, the laughter of beautiful women at galas, all of it fed something inside him. Something dangerous. He began to talk less about we and more about I. Phrases like, I secured the deal, or I had a great call with investors today. Sarah still celebrated his wins, but in her heart, she felt herself becoming a side character in a story they once wrote together. One cold February night, Sarah stood in their kitchen reheating leftovers. The clock ticked past 9:30 p.m. Mark wasn't home. Again. She sat on the couch with Eva, who asked if they could read together. Sarah agreed. They curled up under a blanket and read The Paper Bag Princess, a favorite, but halfway through, Eva looked up. Do you think Daddy doesn't want to be here anymore? She asked. Sarah's throat tightened. He does. He's just chasing something. Something he thinks he needs. Doesn't he need us? The child's question hit harder than any business loss ever could. Eva's 8th birthday came on a Saturday in early spring. Sarah planned everything. Backyard balloons, cupcakes, a magician. Neighbors and classmates came. Laughter filled the yard. But Mark missed it. He was in Dallas, closing a deal with a new supplier. He sent a video message, singing happy birthday, and showing her a new tablet he'd picked up. But it didn't matter. That night, Eva cried, not because she didn't get the tablet, but because, as she said, Daddy wasn't there when I blew the candles. Sarah tucked her in, then walked outside to the porch. She sat in silence for a long time, the stars overhead as indifferent as the blinking cursor on the email she would send Mark later that night. That night, Sarah finally asked herself, was this what she signed up for? She loved Mark, still did. But their relationship had become a performance, full of highlights for social media and empty of connection at home. She remembered their vow to rise together, always. But now she was rising alone, holding a home while Mark built an empire, one that no longer included her in its foundation, and though she didn't know it yet, a choice was coming. One that would fracture everything. The sky over Cleveland was dark that night, not from rain, but from the silence inside Mark and Sarah's home. The kind of silence that wraps around you when two people sleep in the same house but live in different worlds. Sarah lay awake in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling fan, rotating lazily above. The sheets beside her were cold. Mark had returned from another trip and gone straight into the guest room, not out of anger, but because he didn't want to wake her. That was the story they both told themselves. But the truth? They hadn't been sleeping beside each other in months. In the early days, Sarah and Mark couldn't go a day without sharing everything. Ideas, jokes, frustration, dreams. Now, their conversations were transactional. Did the payroll report come in? Ava has a dentist appointment at 3. I'll be back Thursday night. I'll call. They were no longer partners. They were roommates, business associates, co-parents, and Sarah was tired. The final straw came one Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had discovered, through a passing comment from Carl Maddox, that Mark had initiated a merger conversation with a venture-backed firm out of Pennsylvania. It wasn't finalized, but it was serious. The problem? He never told her. She confronted him in the driveway as he returned from work, portfolio in hand. Are you planning to sell a part of the company? She asked flatly. Mark hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. It's exploratory, he said. Nothing solid. Just seeing what's out there. Out there? Sarah repeated, her voice trembling. We built what's in here, Mark. Together. He looked down at the ground. You wouldn't have understood the play. It's about scaling. She shook her head. You used to need me in these conversations. He replied too quickly. I still do. She took a step back. Then why don't you show it? That night, she waited until Eva was asleep. Then she sat across from him in the living room. No wine, no music, just the raw air of confrontation. I think we need space, she said. Mark blinked. You mean a trip? I mean time apart, Sarah said, voice steady but pained. You're not here, Mark. Even when you are, you're not. He shook his head slowly. Everything I've done has been for this family. I don't feel like part of it anymore. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came. For once, he didn't have a speech ready. No quarterly goal to quote, no growth metric to explain it all away. He reached for her hand. Don't do this. Sarah pulled her hand back gently. I'm not leaving you, Mark. I'm finding myself, and taking our daughter with me, because she needs presence, not presence. And that was it. No slamming doors, no screaming. Just a suitcase, a soft goodbye, and the sound of Eva's stuffed bear being tucked under her arm as she followed her mother out the door. Sarah moved into a smaller home just 2 neighborhoods away. It was modest but warm, filled with sunlight and second-hand furniture that somehow made the space feel alive. She set up a home office and began freelancing as a financial consultant. She was good at it, better than she remembered. Clients respected her, and some even asked if she had once built a company herself. She didn't say much, but she smiled. Eva adapted surprisingly well. Kids are resilient, especially when love remains consistent. Sarah made sure Eva never felt abandoned. They developed new routines: Taco Tuesdays, bedtime books, and homemade tomato soup Saturdays. Sometimes Sarah would catch her daughter looking at the front door as if expecting Mark to walk in, but she never asked why he didn't, and that hurt more than any fight ever could. Back at the company, Mark kept moving. He buried himself in quarterly reports, new product development, and philanthropic initiatives designed to improve the company's public image. He began sponsoring local robotics programs in schools, launched a foundation for tech apprenticeships, all meaningful things. But none of them filled the silence in his home. He kept expecting the emptiness to go away, that if he just focused harder, worked longer, built bigger, he could outrun the ache, but he couldn't. He started noticing the gaps, the way his fridge was always full, but his house always cold, the way his office, once a place of dreams, now felt like a waiting room with no one coming. And then there were the papers. Sarah didn't rush anything. She had no interest in drama or revenge, but she had sent the preliminary divorce documents through their attorney. Mark left them unopened on his desk for 3 weeks. He stared at the envelope every night, read and reread the printed name, Mark D. Whitmore. He used to love seeing his name on official documents, contracts, awards, tax forms. Now it made him nauseous. He couldn't bring himself to sign, not because of ego, but because deep down, he knew he had failed at the one thing that mattered most. One afternoon, Mark had Eva over for the weekend. He was supposed to take her to the Science Museum. Instead, a supplier call ran long. By the time he got home, she was curled up on the couch, half asleep, museum pamphlet clutched in her hand. "Did you forget?" she asked groggily. He crouched beside her, guilt overwhelming him. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Daddy just got busy," she said. And she said it without anger. That's what shattered him. Not a tantrum, not tears, just quiet resignation. She was already adjusting to disappointment. That night, after tucking her in, Mark stood in front of the bathroom mirror and really looked at himself. Not the CEO, not the genius, not the speaker on tech panels. Just a man who had built everything except a lasting place in the hearts of those who mattered most. It didn't happen overnight. But Mark started texting Sarah, not about logistics, about small things. "Ava told me she likes blueberries now. That's new. Do you remember the first bank we pitched? I walked past it today." Sarah didn't ignore him, but her replies were careful, guarded. Eventually, she allowed him to join them for Sunday afternoon lunch. Just a trial run, nothing serious, but it felt serious to Mark. It felt like air returning to lungs long collapsed. One quiet spring afternoon, Mark came to drop Eva off after a library event. As Sarah walked outside to greet them, she saw her daughter kneeling in the garden with a shoebox. "What are you doing, baby?" Sarah asked. Eva held up the box, which she had buried halfway. Inside were drawings, a small plastic toy, and a handwritten note. It read, "Dear Daddy, I miss you. I want us to be together again. Love, Eva." Mark stood frozen, his mouth trembling. Sarah reached down and gently lifted the box. Her eyes locked with Mark's, and for the first time in many months, no bitterness passed between them. Only shared sorrow, and perhaps shared hope. Later that evening, as Sarah washed dishes and Mark helped Eva with a puzzle, he turned and asked softly, "Do you think there's a way back?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She dried her hands, walked over, and looked him in the eyes. "I think the question isn't whether we can find our way back," she said. "It's whether you remember the road." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'm learning." She didn't say yes, She didn't say no, but she didn't close the door. Spring in Cleveland is a quiet kind of resurrection. After months of frost and silence, life gently returns. The sidewalks no longer crack under the weight of snow boots. The trees begin to bud with reluctant green. It's a season that doesn't scream, it whispers. And in that soft reawakening, Mark began rebuilding his life. Not with grand gestures, not with flowers or speeches, but with presence. He started small. He began blocking off time on his calendar labeled non-negotiable, Eva. At first, his assistant thought it was a vendor meeting. Then she realized he was serious. He declined a major investor call because it conflicted with a school art show. When Sarah and Eva saw him waiting outside the gymnasium, wearing a simple button-up and holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers, it felt unreal. He wasn't late. He wasn't on his phone. He was present. And Eva ran to him, not because he was a CEO, but because he was her dad. Mark reduced his role at M&S Technologies. He gave up the idea of merging, called off acquisition talks, and declined a board seat on an external venture. Carl Maddox was skeptical. "You're stepping away from opportunity." Mark replied calmly, "No, I'm stepping into my legacy." He delegated more to a younger operations team, took a pay cut, moved his office to a smaller corner suite. He even repurposed the old prototype room into a youth tech mentorship space. He didn't need to chase headlines anymore. He needed to chase time, the one currency that never returns once spent. They met again at the lawyer's office one rainy Thursday. The papers were still there, signed only by Sarah. Mark slid them back across the table. "I want to try again," he said simply. "Not just for Eva. For us." The attorney looked between them, unsure whether to say something or wait. Sarah tapped her fingers on the table. "I'm not rushing back, Mark. I'm not asking you to," he replied. "But I'd like to date my wife. If she'll let me." For a moment, it felt like old times. The charm in his smile, the sincerity in his eyes. Sarah looked at the lawyer and whispered, "Let's put this on hold." Their reunion wasn't cinematic. It was cautious. They met for coffee every Friday, sometimes alone, sometimes with Eva. They talked about everything but the company. Books, movies, parenting, regrets, the past. Sometimes Sarah still looked at him and remembered the loneliness. Sometimes Mark would feel the sting of having almost lost everything. But slowly, those memories stopped being wounds. They became reminders of what not to repeat. One afternoon, after a quiet picnic at Edgewater Park, Eva handed her parents a drawing. It showed the three of them standing under a tree with a rainbow overhead. A small sign in the corner read, "My family came back." Sarah smiled, blinking back tears. Mark whispered, "That's better than any contract I've ever signed." They didn't rush to move in together again. Instead, they began working on a joint project, a nonprofit foundation to teach entrepreneurship and family business literacy in struggling neighborhoods. They called it From Scratch Foundation. Its mission, to help couples, families, and solo dreamers turn passion into sustainable ventures without losing themselves along the way. Sarah ran the financial workshops. Mark handled the tech boot camps. Together, they became mentors, teachers, partners again, but on a new plane. People often asked if they were back together. They'd smile and say, "We're growing together again, step by step." On a mild summer night, 1 year after Sarah walked out, Mark invited her to a quiet dinner. In the backyard of the house he still owned, the house that once felt so empty. He had restored the garden she loved, hung lights along the fence, even cooked her favorite stir-fry, using a recipe Eva had helped him learn. As they sat beneath the string lights, Eva asleep upstairs, Sarah looked around and whispered, "It feels like home again." Mark reached into his pocket, not with a ring this time, but with a folded napkin. On it were 2 scribbled words, "Still us?" Sarah laughed softly, shook her head, then took the napkin and tucked it into her purse. Later that evening, as they stood watching the stars, Mark finally said aloud what had been buried for years. "I thought building a company would give me power, respect, purpose, but all it really did was distract me from the people who already gave me all of that without asking for anything." Sarah replied, "I thought loving you was enough to keep us close. But I forgot, love still needs attention, time, effort. And in that simple exchange, they found the truth. Love, like business, requires reinvestment, not in capital, in care. Years later, people would talk about M&S Technologies not just for their tech, but for their heart. The foundation helped hundreds of families start ventures, many of them led by women who'd been invisible behind their partners' shadows. Mark and Sarah's story was never sold to the media, but in the neighborhoods they served, it was quietly passed on, a tale of love, loss, and rediscovery. Their daughter Eva grew up grounded, brilliant, compassionate. At her high school graduation, she stood at the podium and said, "My parents taught me that success is not what you build, but what you're still holding when the storms come. That's what matters. That's what lasts." Mark once promised Sarah, "One day, I'll give you everything you deserve." In the end, he did. Not in contracts, not in cash, but in showing up, in choosing family over fame, and in learning that no amount of prosperity is worth the price of losing love. Not every second chance leads back to what once was. Sometimes, it leads to something better. Sarah didn't move back into Mark's house immediately. She stayed in her neighborhood, kept her consulting clients, and focused on raising Eva with structure and grace. But every week, she and Mark met. Sometimes for business planning, sometimes for lunch, always for Eva. And bit by bit, they began rebuilding a partnership that looked nothing like the first one. This one had no illusions. It had intention. Sarah's work with the From Scratch Foundation had begun as volunteer outreach, but her financial strategy workshops were growing in popularity. Women, especially mothers, came from across the city to learn how to build sustainable micro-businesses. She taught budgeting, credit repair, contracts. More importantly, she taught resilience. When a local news anchor featured her on a community spotlight segment, her inbox flooded with requests for speaking engagements. Mark watched in awe. She was brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. He'd always known it. But now the world did too. And Sarah? She was glowing in her own lane. For the first time in years, she wasn't just part of someone else's vision. She was building one of her own. One evening, Sarah brought an idea to Mark. She wanted M&S Technologies to create a new division, one focused on smart energy sensors for small-scale homes and underserved urban areas. Affordable, efficient, easy to install. There's a massive gap in the market, she explained, flipping through a binder of research. Everyone's chasing high-end industrial, but no one's thinking about the people left behind. Mark studied the charts. The margins were tight, the R&D risky, but the impact, he murmured, "It's huge." Sarah looked him in the eye. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for partnership." It was the first time she said it like that. And Mark understood. She didn't want to return to the company they had. She wanted to build the company they should have created. One with both their names on it, not just his face in the spotlight. Mark agreed, but with one condition. Sarah would lead the new division as CEO of M&S Green Tech, an independent but connected branch. It shocked the board. Even Carl Maddox looked skeptical. "You're handing over a subsidiary to someone outside the current executive tree?" Mark replied, "I'm handing it to the person who built the roots of this entire company." Sarah's onboarding was swift. She picked her own team. Young, diverse, driven. People who had lived the struggle and wanted to change lives, not just market numbers. Within 4 months, their first beta units were installed in local homes. Within 6 months, energy bills dropped by 30% in pilot neighborhoods. Within a year, they won a national innovation grant. The same media outlets that once praised Mark now began featuring Sarah. From CFO's wife to CEO, how Sarah Whitmore is powering change, the brilliant brain behind Green Tech's rise. One article even suggested the company had always undervalued her. Mark read every piece, and instead of feeling overshadowed, he felt proud, because the story wasn't about her success over his, it was about their evolution. But not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, Carl Maddox called a private meeting with Mark. "We've received interest from a firm in San Diego, big money. They want in badly." Mark raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "The whole company, M&S Technologies, including Green Tech." Mark leaned back in his chair. "We're not for sale. They're willing to pay 9 figures. I said, "We're not for sale." Carl's voice tightened. "You built something valuable, Mark. Don't let sentiment blind you." Mark stood, calm, resolute. "Carl, sentiment is the only reason this company still has a soul. You forget that, and we lose everything." When Mark told Sarah about the offer, she didn't respond right away. Instead, she poured tea into 2 mugs and handed him one. Then she said, "Thank you." He tilted his head. "For what?" "For remembering that this was never just about parts and profit. It was about people, family, legacy." Mark nodded. "And now it's about your vision too," she smirked. "Our vision, still." Meanwhile, their daughter Eva was thriving. She had started a small podcast at school, interviewing classmates and teachers about inventions that could make the world better. Her favorite guest? Sarah, of course. During the interview, Eva asked, "What do you think is the most powerful thing in the world, Mom?" Sarah smiled. "The courage to start again. Even after you mess up." Mark watched the recording later. His eyes watered, because, in that moment, he realized something. His daughter wasn't just watching them. She was learning from them. And they were giving her a blueprint far more valuable than any business plan: how to fall and rise together. Months passed. The company flourished. The foundation expanded. The house Mark once walked through alone was now filled again, with music, cooking, laughter, and plans. Sarah finally moved back in, not as a returning guest, but as a partner, an equal, a mother, a CEO. She kept her old office, remodeled it, filled the shelves with books on leadership, equity, and sustainable business. And every morning, as she passed Mark's office, she tapped the glass. Once, gently, with 2 fingers, a signal they'd created long ago. "We're still here." On a warm Saturday morning, Mark stood at a local community event hosted by their foundation. Kids were building solar-powered toy cars. Parents attended budget workshops. Volunteers handed out food and books. He watched Sarah guiding a workshop. Her voice was calm, assured, her smile real. A man beside him, a local pastor, leaned over and said, "That's a strong woman you got there." Mark nodded. "She's more than strong. She's the reason I'm still standing." The man smiled. "You're both lucky." Mark didn't respond right away, but in his heart he knew this wasn't luck. This was grace, earned, not granted, through mistakes, through growth, through choosing love again. It started with an email. Simple subject line: urgent, FWD, green tech vendor issue. Sarah opened it late one night after tucking Eva in. The sender was a junior logistics coordinator. The attachment? A scanned invoice from one of their new suppliers, Enermotion Systems. Only, it wasn't Enermotion's official format. It was doctored. Numbers were inflated. Units didn't match the shipment. The amounts were small enough to fly under radar: $5,000 here, $9,800 there. But they'd been recurring for months. Sarah's pulse quickened. She ran the figures, cross-checked the files. 3 vendors, 2 were fake. 1 had no legal record. Her breath caught. This wasn't an accident. Someone was stealing from Green Tech. By morning, Sarah had her legal team on it. She didn't go to Mark right away, not out of secrecy, but because she needed evidence. Facts. Clean lines. Within 48 hours, it became clear. Someone inside M&S Green Tech had created shell vendors and was funneling funds, slowly, strategically, through fake contracts. The fraud totaled nearly $312,000 over 9 months. Sarah's first instinct was shock. Her second? Fire. She called Mark to the rooftop patio outside their Cleveland HQ. "We have a leak," she said, handing him the report. He read it silently, jaw tightening. "Who?" Sarah hesitated. The name was right there on the last page. And when Mark saw it, he froze. Carl Maddox. Carl had been there since the early days of their rise. He had helped them secure early expansions, refine cash flow models, and establish credit lines. Trusted, respected. But somewhere along the way, the man who once believed in their mission had become disillusioned. "Why?" Mark whispered. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Because we changed direction. We became something he couldn't control. The evidence was airtight. A second, hidden LLC. Payments routed through a shell consultancy. Signatures traced to Carl's assistant, who, when questioned, cracked within hours and turned over emails. Mark felt sick. He had trusted Carl with everything. They had two options: press charges and go public, risking the brand's reputation and donor confidence in the foundation, or quietly settle, remove Carl and patch the hole internally, but risk setting a precedent for silence. Sarah made the call. "We go public," she said. "We built this company on transparency. We don't stop now." Mark nodded. "Even if it costs us." "Especially if it does," she replied. The emergency board meeting was tense. Shareholders wanted answers. Some panicked. Others accused. One even insinuated that Sarah's division lacked oversight. Mark stood up mid-sentence. "Enough." His voice cut through the room like thunder. "Sarah didn't cause this. She uncovered it. You're only standing here with facts because she had the integrity to chase them down. Don't confuse leadership with fault." The room went quiet. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't need to. Mark had spoken as a partner. They released a joint press statement. As co-founders of M&S Technologies and leaders of the Green Tech Initiative, we are committed to full transparency and accountability. A recent internal investigation revealed financial misconduct by a senior advisor. Immediate corrective action has been taken. Legal proceedings are underway. Our mission remains unchanged: to build with integrity, impact, and care. The media firestorm lasted 3 weeks. Investors wavered. Donors paused. But community support poured in. Families wrote letters. Clients offered encouragement. Employees rallied. The public saw something rare in modern business: a couple willing to expose their own wound to prevent deeper rot. But behind the courage, the storm took its toll. Sarah barely slept. Mark buried himself in damage control. Tension returned, not out of distrust, but fatigue. One night, after Eva had gone to bed, Mark found Sarah sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the dishwasher. He sat beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Then she said, "Why does doing the right thing feel so heavy?" He replied, "Because it costs something, but it's always cheaper than regret." She leaned her head on his shoulder. And in that quiet moment, they remembered, this wasn't the first time they had fought the world together. But it was the first time they were fighting it as equals, and that made all the difference. At a school talent show weeks later, Eva took the stage with a short speech titled, "What Makes People Brave?" She ended with this: "I think bravery isn't about being loud. It's about doing the hard stuff when nobody's clapping. Like my mom and dad, they're brave every day, even when it hurts." Sarah cried quietly in the back row. Mark held her hand. And in that simple moment, they both knew this was the reward. Not money, not headlines, legacy. Through the eyes of the child who watched them rebuild their world the right way. The following quarter, Green Tech rebounded stronger than ever. Mark and Sarah launched a new internal ethics program, hiring young leaders from Cleveland State to audit their systems. They began hosting truth panels, monthly sessions where employees could raise concerns anonymously and directly. Their story became case study material in business schools. When integrity wins, the M&S Technologies turn around. But Sarah and Mark knew something no study could teach. The true turnaround wasn't in spreadsheets. It was in learning how to lose without losing each other. Summer returned to Cleveland with gentle rain and blooming hydrangeas. And in the Whitmore home, something even rarer returned: peace. Not silence, not stillness, but a sense of rhythm. The morning rushes to get Eva to school. The smell of cinnamon toast, late-night tea on the porch, laughter echoing from the hallway. The sound of life, rediscovered. They weren't trying to go back. They were building forward. Mark's calendar now had a block in red ink: family mornings, no meetings, no excuses. At first, his assistant thought it was symbolic. Then she watched him turn down a conference keynote to be at Eva's violin recital. She never questioned the red block again. Sarah, meanwhile, began writing a children's book, inspired by Eva, about a girl who fixes broken things by listening closely. The story had no villain, just people who forgot to listen until they learned how, again. Eva helped with illustrations. Mark cried when he read it. "This is better than anything I've ever built," he told her. Eva wasn't just watching her parents anymore. She was blossoming from their example. Her podcast grew from a school project into a small online platform. She began interviewing local community heroes, firefighters, artists, janitors, teachers, asking them about courage and kindness. One afternoon, she asked Mark to be her guest. He hesitated. "You sure people want to hear from someone who almost lost everything?" Ava smiled. "That's exactly why." In the family's living room, turned makeshift studio, Ava pressed record. "Dad?" she asked. "What's the bravest thing you've ever done?" Mark thought for a long time. Finally, he said, "Telling your mom I messed up, and asking if she'd give me another chance, not knowing if she would, not knowing if I even deserved it." Ava nodded. "And what did you learn from it?" Mark smiled. "That building something isn't brave, fixing it when it breaks, that's bravery." Later, Sarah would watch the clip over and over again. Because for once, Mark's genius wasn't in circuits or deals. It was in his heart. Their home transformed into something bigger than walls. It became a hub. Neighbors came for advice. Kids stopped by to play or borrow. Tools and foundation mentees dropped in just to check on Miss Sarah. One summer evening, they hosted a backyard dinner for the foundation team. Ava stood at the head of the table and raised a plastic cup of lemonade. "To my mom and dad," she said, "for teaching me that love isn't perfect, but it's worth it." Everyone cheered. Mark blinked fast. Sarah just reached over, took his hand under the table, and squeezed. M&S Technologies continued to grow, but differently. The culture shifted. Mark and Sarah created a family equity program, offering profit shares to long-time staff, many of whom had been with them since the laundromat days. One of their earliest hires, a soft-spoken engineer named Vanessa, was promoted to CTO. When a young intern named Luis designed a groundbreaking energy storage chip, Sarah personally helped him secure the patent in his name, refusing to absorb his credit. "Genius," she said, "deserves its name on the door." M&S wasn't just a company anymore, it was a launch pad. On their wedding anniversary, Sarah suggested a drive, not to the coast, not to a resort, but to their first apartment, the one above the laundromat. The building was still there, weather-worn, one window broken, but the memories pulsed like music. They stood outside, side by side. Mark whispered, "Remember how loud those washing machines were?" Sarah laughed. "Remember how you used to solder circuits on the toaster?" They didn't go inside. They didn't need to. Sometimes love doesn't live in buildings. It lives in what you survived inside them. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out an old desk drawer, Sarah found a leather notebook. Mark's handwriting, early sketches, business plans, cost projections, but tucked in the back, a page she'd never seen. It read, "If this works, I'll buy her the stars. If it fails, I'll still give her the world." Her throat caught. She closed the notebook, placed it back in the drawer, and whispered, "You did both." This time, Mark didn't miss it. He planned it. He called vendors, booked the balloon arch, made the invitations himself, and even handwrote a welcome speech. At the party, he stood with Sarah by his side. "Last year, I missed this," he began. "And I missed more than a birthday. I missed moments. But this year, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Everyone clapped. Eva ran up, hugging him tightly. Later that night, as they put her to bed, Eva whispered, "This was the best day of my life." Sarah looked at Mark. He smiled. "No business deal could beat that," he said. That evening, Sarah pulled out a folder marked Legacy Project, 10-Year Vision. She had been working quietly on it, a plan to expand the From Scratch Foundation into other cities, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. "We've helped so many," she told Mark. "But there are more stories out there, more families, more kids like Ava watching." Mark nodded. "Let's do it." She smiled, not as backup, as Kyo founders. Again, he leaned over and kissed her forehead. "This time, we name it after you." One final image, the three of them walking through a city park at dusk. Eva is laughing, skipping ahead, stopping to pick up a flower. Sarah and Mark walk behind, not arm in arm but shoulder to shoulder. Aligned, strong, equal. No crowns, no empires, just a family. Together, still growing. The letter arrived in a crisp envelope with a golden seal. Inside, a single page. elegant, formal. You are hereby nominated for the Presidential Innovation Award for Community Advancement in Technology. Your work in sustainable energy, minority-led entrepreneurship, and post-industrial economic revitalization has been recognized at the national level. We invite you to Washington, D.C., for a private roundtable and public ceremony. M&S Technologies and the From Scratch Foundation co-founders, Mark and Sarah Whitmore. Mark stared at the letter for a full minute, then looked at Sarah, who stood frozen across the room, hand over her mouth. They had dreamed of making impact, but they never imagined it would echo into history. If this story is resonating with you so far, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Mr. Favor Tales, where every story heals, teaches, and lifts the soul. The next few weeks were a blur of press calls, travel arrangements, and quiet awe. Major news outlets requested interviews. Magazines wanted a photo shoot. Business podcasts flooded their inboxes. Eva even got her own mini feature as a kid creator following family footsteps. But amid the glow of applause, something deeper stirred inside Mark. It felt familiar, that old rush, the thrill of being wanted, of being seen. He didn't hate it, but he feared it. Because the last time he chased that feeling, it almost cost him everything. During the DC trip, after a powerful roundtable with other social entrepreneurs, Mark and Sarah were approached by a White House advisor and 2 private foundation executives. The offer? A $100 million public-private development grant to expand their programs nationally, full rollout in 12 cities over 5 years. There was one condition. M&S Technologies would have to merge into a federal innovation consortium. Control would shift. Public boards, regulatory oversight, a political advisory group. The money was real. The reach? Unthinkable. But so was the sacrifice. They wouldn't be owners anymore. They'd be faces, not founders. That night, in the hotel suite overlooking Capitol Hill, Sarah sat on the window seat, barefoot and silent. Mark poured 2 glasses of wine, handed her one. "Say it," he said. She sighed. "I'm proud, but I don't want to lose our soul again." He nodded. "Feels like déjà vu, doesn't it?" They both knew the stakes. This wasn't just about them now. Hundreds of families depended on their programs. Staff, students, dreamers, all climbing from the same places they once called home. Was saying no selfish? Was saying yes naive? The next morning, Eva came to breakfast still wearing her little junior innovator badge. She asked, "Are we going to be on TV again?" Mark laughed. "Maybe. Are we gonna move?" "Why do you ask?" "Because when grown-ups do big things, they usually stop being around." Sarah froze. Mark crouched beside his daughter and whispered, "We already did the biggest thing." "What?" "Stayed together." They waited 3 days. Mark canceled 2 interviews. Sarah postponed a keynote. They sat down at their kitchen table, no assistants, no PR team, just them and a yellow legal pad. On it, they wrote, pros, reach, funding, expansion, prestige. Cons, loss of autonomy, political compromise, dilution of vision, family time risk. At the bottom, Sarah scribbled a quote from their first business plan, long forgotten. "We do not build for attention. We build for impact with integrity." Mark saw it. Tapped the table. "That's our answer." They declined the merger, but counter-offered to scale through licensed hubs, local partnerships, decentralized leadership, and full community ownership. The White House said it was unconventional, but agreed. Because true innovators don't follow formulas, they create them. Back home, they doubled down on Cleveland. New centers opened in Detroit and St. Louis, not controlled by M&S, but powered by it. Eva helped launch Kid Genius Clubs, weekly sessions for kids 8 to 12, to tinker with recycled tech, sketch ideas, and solve neighborhood problems. One child created a bike-powered generator for his grandma's apartment. Another rebuilt a drone to deliver food to shut-in neighbors. Mark watched them with misty eyes. "These kids are building what I only dreamed of," he said. Sarah smiled. "That's the whole point." 2 years later, a new brick building opened in their neighborhood. Not corporate, not sleek, but beautiful. Painted murals of families and circuit boards, hands holding tools, children holding books. Above the door, The Whitmore Family Center for Innovation, Resilience, and Love. No logos, just a name. And a legacy, built not on ambition, but on restoration. It was a simple school project that changed everything. Ava's 7th grade assignment: who inspires you? While most students chose celebrities, athletes, or musicians, Eva stood in front of her class and shared a 5-minute speech titled, "My Parents Gave Me the Blueprint." She talked about how her mother once gave up a career to build something with her father, how her father almost lost it all chasing power, how they both fell, broke, and chose to repair, not just their marriage, but their mission. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Her teacher sent a copy of the video to the local board. A week later, Eva was invited to speak at a youth leadership conference. If you've been following this journey, let us know in the comments, what's one lesson you've taken from this story so far? Your words may inspire someone else today. Sarah sat alone in the garden, watching Eva rehearse her speech through the window. She could see the same spark, the same fire, that once danced in Mark's eyes when he talked about revolutionizing sensors, or in her own eyes when she first balanced the books for their startup while holding a baby bottle. But Eva's gift wasn't just innovation, it was empathy. She was born of 2 parents who had failed and risen. She was learning how to fly without forgetting where the ground was. One Saturday, Mark took Eva to the MNS production center. He showed her the latest prototype for a self-adjusting energy converter for urban homes. "This is the next breakthrough," he said, smiling. Eva nodded. "Cool, but what if we used recycled materials for the core?" Mark paused. "Recycled? Yeah," she said. "If it's for low-income homes, shouldn't we think about cost and accessibility?" He blinked. She wasn't wrong. She was ahead. And that moment hit him hard, not with jealousy, but joy. His daughter wasn't just learning from him. She was surpassing him. Real growth happens when we're not afraid to be outshined by those we raise. Hit that like button if you agree. Sarah suggested they take a weekend away. No business talk, no meetings, just the 3 of them. They rented a cabin outside of Columbus, surrounded by trees, quiet trails, and the kind of silence that soothes the soul. At night, around a fire, Eva asked, "What was the scariest part of almost losing everything?" Sarah said, "Thinking we'd never laugh in the same room again." Mark added, "Waking up in a big house that didn't feel like home." Eva nodded. "I think I want to build things too, but with people, not machines." Sarah smiled. "Then start now. Start with love. Back home." Eva launched a project through the foundation, the Kind Build, a tech and compassion initiative, where teens repaired electronics and wrote letters of encouragement to those receiving them. A single mom in Akron received a refurbished laptop and a note from a 13-year-old that read, "You're stronger than you know. We believe in you." The mom cried. Mark cried too. Because this was what all the board meetings, all the blueprints, all the late nights had been for. Not profit. Purpose. Sarah found it in an old folder, tucked behind stacks of old proposals. A letter she had written herself, but never mailed. It was addressed to Mark, dated during the time they were separated. "If you ever find your way back, I won't be standing in the same place. I'll be farther down the road, wiser, wearier, but I'll wait if you're walking toward me with open eyes. I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to see me." She handed it to him one night. Mark read it, held it to his heart, and whispered, "I see you now, every day." We hope this story is helping you reflect on what truly matters. Like, comment, and share this video with someone who might need this reminder. Love doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. Eva's middle school graduation was small but heartfelt. Mark and Sarah sat front row, holding hands, watching their daughter beam in a bright blue gown. Later that evening at home, Eva gave them each a note. Mark said, "You taught me how to fall and rise with dignity. You are my blueprint." Sarah said, "You showed me what grace looks like, not just in success, but in struggle. You are my roots." They framed the letters, and in their hearts, a new chapter had begun. One evening, Sarah stood in front of the whiteboard in their home office. "We need to think about the next 10 years. Mark smiled. "You mean succession?" "Yes," she said. "But not to step away, to step back, so others can rise." They started mentoring 3 young executives, gave them real authority, let them make mistakes. Every board meeting ended with a round called Human Wins. No numbers, just stories. An employee who adopted. A family that paid off debt. A kid who built a wind-powered phone charger. This was now their currency. Ava stood in front of a panel of local investors. She was 14. Her idea? A mobile app that connects youth volunteers with elder care homes in need of help, both technical and emotional. She called it Bridge General. She presented confidently, cited demographics, showed pilot results, and when asked who her biggest inspiration was, she answered without hesitation, my parents. Because they taught me that building something that matters means never forgetting the people you love most. They got full funding. It began with a simple cough. At first, Mark brushed it off. He'd always had sinus issues. Blamed it on the changing seasons, the stress of travel, a late-night board meeting. But then, it didn't stop. Then came the dizziness, the lightheaded spells. One afternoon, while speaking at a youth technology summit, his voice cracked mid-sentence. He paused. The room blurred, and everything went dark. When he came to, Sarah was already at his bedside. Eva stood at the foot of the hospital bed, her eyes red and glassy. You passed out, Dad, she said softly. He tried to joke. Did I at least say something profound before I dropped? But Sarah didn't laugh. She just held his hand. Before we go deeper, take a moment and share in the comments. What would you do if you were given one more chance to make things right? It wasn't cancer. It wasn't terminal, but it was a warning. Mark had developed a rare neurological condition affecting his blood pressure and balance. Autonomic dysfunction, brought on by years of chronic stress and irregular sleep patterns. The doctor's words were calm but serious. You'll live a long life, Mr. Whitmore, but you'll have to change how you live it. It wasn't about surgery or medicine. It was about rhythm, stillness, balance. Mark had spent decades running. Now his body was saying, enough. That night, Sarah and Eva stayed in the hospital room. Eva curled up on the couch beside her father, holding his hand, whispering a prayer. God, don't take him, not yet. He still has to teach me how to fix things. Sarah turned away, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Mark heard every word, and it broke him, not from fear, but from clarity. Mark began writing in a journal Sarah brought him. On page 1, he wrote, if you could speak to the man who chased everything and almost lost it all, what would you say? He answered, slow down, listen more, hug longer, laugh deeper, say no when you're tired, say yes when you're loved, and never mistake applause for peace. He never showed that page to anyone, but it changed everything that followed. If this part of the story touched something in you, hit that like button and let others know they're not alone in their healing. Every heart needs a second chance. Mark spent 6 months slowing down. He no longer attended every meeting. He no longer reviewed every document. Instead, he began mentoring. One-on-one sessions with young entrepreneurs, fireside chats with teens, quiet walks with foundation interns. He became the elder in the room, not the leader who barked, but the one who listened. And people listened back, because now he wasn't teaching from theory. He was teaching from scars. Sarah became the face of the business. Investors, schools, city boards, all looked to her for leadership, and she rose into it with calm authority. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was building futures. At a Cleveland Business Honors event, she was given the Torchbearer Award for Social Enterprise. In her speech, she said, the greatest measure of leadership is not what you build in your name, but what remains standing when your name fades. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Mark watched from the back, tears in his eyes, whispering, that's my girl. On her 15th birthday, Eva gave her parents a handmade book. Inside were photos, letters, quotes, and sketches. At the end she wrote, one day I'll lead something. I don't know what yet, but I do know this. I won't lead from fear. I'll lead from love, because you showed me how. They didn't throw a big party that year. They just held her. In the quiet of their living room. No cameras, no noise, just a family. Months later, Mark was asked to give one last keynote. He almost said no, but Sarah encouraged him. So, at a local TEDx stage, Mark stood slowly, hands shaking slightly, and looked into a room full of dreamers, and said, I built a company, then almost let it destroy my family. I chased success, but it didn't chase me back. I confused ambition with identity, power with love, but the greatest thing I ever did wasn't M&S Technologies. It was asking for forgiveness and doing the work to deserve it. You don't have to lose everything to learn, but if you do, learn fast, love deeply, and don't waste your second chance. The room was silent. Then someone stood, then another, then everyone. Ava found an old box in the attic. Inside was the time capsule she once buried in the yard years ago. They opened it together, the plastic bear, the crayon drawings, the note that read, "Come home, Daddy." She looked up at him. "I think you did," she whispered. He pulled her close. "No," he said. "We did." And in that attic, under dim light and dusty memories, a family stood whole. Not perfect, but whole. And ready. The air was crisp in Cleveland that morning. Golden leaves scattered across sidewalks and rooftops. Sarah opened the curtains of the old office that had once been their only space, back when M&S Technologies fit inside one cramped room, and their baby napped beside stacks of invoice files. Now, decades later, that office had been converted into a heritage room, a modest exhibit that told the story of the company's roots. Mark stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "Feels smaller than I remember," he said. Sarah smiled. "That's because we grew." 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had sent a memo to the board. Subject line, "Whitmore Succession Roadmap, Let's Talk Transition." In it, she outlined a 3-year succession plan. She and Mark would remain on the board as non-executive founders. A new leadership team, built from within, would gradually take over all operational duties. The document wasn't about stepping away. It was about stepping aside so others could step forward. There was no announcement, no fanfare, just a quiet reshuffling of desks and responsibilities, one that symbolized maturity, trust, and grace. Mark took one last solo walk through the engineering wing. He greeted every staff member by name, asked about their kids, their parents, their projects. He stopped by a young woman's desk, Tony, an intern he once mentored. She showed him her new AI-powered prototype. "We're testing this next week." He nodded. "Looks incredible." She asked, "You nervous about stepping away?" Mark chuckled. "No, because I'm not stepping out. I'm just stepping aside so you can fly." Tony smiled. "We'll make you proud." Mark nodded. "You already have. Like this video, if you believe in lifting others as you rise. We rise faster when we do it together." A few days later, Ava stood on stage at her high school's Youth Entrepreneur Conference. Her topic, "The future belongs to builders who remember. My parents taught me that power isn't in control, it's in care. That brilliance isn't about doing everything yourself, but giving others the tools to dream. And that love, the real kind, shows up when no one's clapping." The crowd rose, and in the back, Sarah gripped Mark's hand. "She's ready," Mark whispered. Sarah smiled, heart full. "So are we." That evening, Sarah invited an unexpected group over for dinner. The old landlord from the laundromat building, a former co-worker from Sarah's bank, the community college instructor who hosted the coding class where they met. Over casseroles and apple pie, they laughed, reminisced, and remembered the 2 kids, who once sat at a broken PC trying to fix something bigger than a motherboard. "You two turned struggle into something beautiful," the landlord said. Sarah replied, "Struggle is where roots grow deepest." And everyone nodded, because they all knew it was true. They called it the last Monday, not because they were disappearing, but because it would be the last Monday they'd lead M&S Technologies. Sarah stood before their staff, engineers, accountants, janitors, interns, and gave the simplest speech of her life. "We started with nothing but a toaster, a baby, and an idea. Today, we step aside not because we're done, but because we trust you. The mission lives in every device you build, every letter you send, every client you serve. Lead with love, build with purpose, and never forget where we began." Mark added only one thing. This was never just a business, it was a family. Applause thundered through the room. Not for them, but for what they represented. If you believe every ending can be a new beginning, share this video with someone starting over. Let's inspire new builders, new lovers, and new legacies. Sarah boxed up old notes, photos, and the silver ring Mark once gave her at their backyard housewarming. "Still fits," she whispered, slipping it on. Mark found his original sketchbook, yellowed, dog-eared, stained with coffee. Inside was the first drawing of their custom connector part. He tore it out, folded it, placed it in his wallet. Not for memory, for reminder. Before leaving the building, they visited the mentorship wall, dozens of photos of interns, mentees, and program graduates. Eva had insisted on adding one last plaque. It read, "To Mark and Sarah Whitmore, the couple who turned broken circuits into complete hearts." They stood in front of it, arms around each other, and for a moment, said nothing. Because there was nothing left to prove, only love to preserve. The house was quiet, not from absence, but peace. Ava had gone on her first school trip out of state. The silence left behind wasn't empty. It was earned. Sarah stood in the kitchen, steaming tea rising before her. Mark sat on the back porch, a blanket across his lap, scribbling something in a journal he never let anyone read. The sun was setting, gold bleeding into pink, casting long shadows across their garden. This wasn't a chapter closing. It was just the page turning. We've come a long way together in this story. Before we close it, tap that like button if you believe in redemptive love, and comment "still worth it" below. Mark suggested they take a walk. No phones, no business, just steps. They strolled through the park where he once taught Eva to ride her bike, past the school where Sarah gave her first financial literacy talk, past the old tech booth where M&S sold their first prototype at a local fair. Every corner held a memory, and every memory had a purpose. As they reached a bench overlooking Lake Erie, Mark stopped. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "I used to think I had to become someone else to be worthy of success. A bigger man, a louder man, a richer man." He looked out at the water. "But it turns out, the greatest thing I ever did was remain the man you believed in, even when I didn't see him anymore." Sarah didn't speak. She just leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. Back home, Ava's room was still and full of presents, books scattered, a half-built prototype on the floor, sticky notes on the mirror that read things like, "Lead with kindness, build what heals, ask for help, then listen." Sarah picked up a note tucked in the corner of Eva's desk. In Eva's handwriting it read, "My parents didn't just build a company, they built a story, and I want to live it, not just tell it." Sarah smiled, because this wasn't just their story anymore. It was hers now too. Every legacy deserves a listener. Share this video with someone who needs hope, healing, or a fresh beginning. Let's keep the chain of redemption going. 1 week later, Sarah stood at the opening of their new mentorship center in Indianapolis. She had been asked to write a message on the first brick, a symbolic gesture to bless the building. She wrote, "To the one who starts with nothing, you have enough. If you have honesty, courage, and someone who believes in you, you already hold the blueprint. Now go build." Sarah Whitmore. And with that, the ribbon was cut, not just on a building, but on a future she would never stop believing in. 2 years later, Eva stood on a national stage, her first major conference as a teen speaker. Her app, BridgeGen, had expanded to 40 cities. Her nonprofit had matched over 12,000 young volunteers with elderly mentors in care homes. She began her speech with one line, "I'm not here because of what my parents gave me. I'm here because of what they almost lost and chose to fight for." In the front row, Mark squeezed Sarah's hand. He didn't cry this time. He just smiled full, proud, peaceful. Years later, Mark and Sarah sat on their front porch, older, slower, but still whole. Eva, now in her 20s, came to visit with a business partner. They brought cookies, talked about a new project in the works. Before leaving, Eva kissed her dad's forehead. "You taught me everything," she said. Mark replied, "You taught me what mattered." As they watched her drive away, Sarah whispered, "Would you do it all again?" Mark leaned back, eyes closed in the breeze. "Every mistake, every fall, every fight. If it brought me back to you, then yes." If this story moved you, subscribe to Mr. Favor Tales right now. There are more stories to tell and someone needs the next one. Some loves survive struggle, others survive distance, but the rarest kind, they survive prosperity, They survive ego. They survive silence. Because those are the loves built on choice, not circumstance. Mark and Sarah didn't just get lucky. They got honest, and they chose each other again. And again, and again. That's what forever really means. And that's what we're about here at Mr. Favortales. Until next time, may your heart be full, your home be warm, and your second chances be real. Good night.